The feeling of being watched, actually, is more frightening than seeing things. If something's watching you, you're assuming that its next move is to do something. A feeling of panic would come over me, like raw panic. I knew something was going to happen.
Within the rugged and domineering Brecon Beacons mountains sits the lonely Heol Fanog farmhouse. This is the location where a young pregnant couple, Liz and Bill Rich, decided to start their new life in the late 80s. Bill's teenage son Lawrence also moved in with the family, all of whom were excited for a new start in the idyllic and peaceful location. What they didn't consider, however, was the reason why the farmhouse had been left empty and hidden away in a desolate landscape. I'm Bleaky, and today we'll tell you the story of Heol Fanog, which has gone by several names over the years, including Britain's most exorcised house, the Witch Farm, the Hellfire Farm, and the Welsh Amyityville. While the family had no inkling that the old farmhouse concealed some sinister secrets within its stone walls when they first moved in, the influx of paranormal activity they were subjected to for 7 years left no doubt in their minds that they were in the presence of pure evil. This case will take you to the furthest regions of the paranormal world, including terrifying apparitions, ancient curses, poltergeist activity, demonic possessions, and even murder. In May 1989, the Rich family cautiously navigated a winding road through the Brecon Beacons, their car packed to the brim with belongings destined for their new home at Heol Fanog, which means road to the peak in Welsh. Bill was an English artist, while Liz was no stranger to the location, as she was a fair-haired Welshwoman. The couple and Bill's 14-year-old son Lawrence were taken aback at how beautiful their new home was, both inside and out. On the day of the move, Liz, who was 3 months pregnant, got to work cleaning layers of dust that had blanketed the interior of the building, while Lawrence went outside to investigate. Shortly after, however, he called his dad, telling him that he had found a ruin. Bill was almost as excited as his son, stating that it looked like the ruin of an old house that probably predated their farm. After further investigation, he noticed that the cellar was still intact, only it was full of water, no doubt collected from the mountain's natural filtration. As they stared at their reflections in the still murky water, Liz gave out a loud scream and pointed, telling them that there was a man in the trees, watching them. Bill called over to the mysterious figure and discovered that it was a sheep farmer from the next farm over called Wyn Thomas. While Liz's scream was a little bit of an overreaction, who just lurks in the trees? Spooky ghosts, that's who. The farmer explained that the ruins were all that was left of the original Heol Fanog manor house. He then cautioned the teen that he should be careful around the cellar, as animals often find themselves stuck and drown to death. After enjoying their first summer as a family unit, in autumn 1989, Liz gave birth to their baby son Ben. Bill was working hard on his art, Liz was taking care of the household, and Lawrence was settling into his new life. But more changes were in store for the family, and not the ones they welcomed. One night, Bill went to the toilet, but as he was midstream, he heard loud thundering footsteps run across the hall as if somebody was wearing heavy boots. Bill quickly rushed out to see if it was Lawrence, but nobody was there. He checked on his son, but he was fast asleep. He first thought that Lawrence may have been playing a trick and faking it, but he could see that he was clearly asleep and couldn't have moved that quickly. Bill's heart then dropped, and the cold grasp of fear took hold of him. If it wasn't his son, who was it? He rushed downstairs to check for an intruder, but found all windows and doors were locked. While that incident scared Bill, it was the delivery of his electric bill that truly terrified him. When the first bill arrived, the couple were expecting around £100 for the quarter, so were astonished to find that it was around £750. Bill thought it must have been a mistake, but after calling the electric company, he was told that there was no mistake and that was the amount of power the household used. The thing is, it would be almost impossible to run up that kind of bill in just a few months. By today's standards, it would be like paying almost £2,000 for 3 months of electricity. That's a lot of juice. Those who are no strangers to the paranormal, especially investigators, will know that sometimes batteries on cameras and torches can suddenly drain without any reason for doing so. This is believed by some to be because ghosts and other types of spirits can use that electricity to power themselves. Could this be the case here? They should have checked the small print with the power company. They don't always cover excessive paranormal forces. Trust me, I've tried that excuse. While whatever was draining the electricity hadn't used all that energy yet, it wouldn't be long until it did. One afternoon, Liz was putting baby Ben down for a nap. The soothing sound of his mother's voice was suddenly silenced by the sound of the bedroom door slamming shut. What made this even weirder, however, was that the door was shut the entire time and never opened to be slammed. Whatever spirit still lingered at Heol Fanog, it was clear that they wanted their presence to be known. In the days that followed, the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard by everyone in the house, storming from one side of the hall to the bathroom door, like a lactose-intolerant man regretting last night's margarita pizza. While the family tried to theorise what the noise could be, from mice to expanding floorboards, none of their explanations fit. They could also hear a strange whirring noise, almost like the sound of an old movie projector, from somewhere in the house. Another strange phenomenon that began to materialise was the awful smell of sulphur. Also not too unlike a lactose-intolerant man, the smell would begin out of nowhere and get stronger before dissipating. Another strange smell the family experienced was sickly sweet incense, reminiscent of a church. Before long, they realised that the smells would accompany the whirring sound. The sound led them to the electric meter cupboard and found that the numbers measuring the usage of electricity were spinning around like it was powering a Las Vegas casino, before suddenly stopping, along with the foul stench. The family realised that when the activity was happening, the sound, or the influx of electricity used, increased. If that was me, I'd be like, no, flip the mains off, get the candles out, I'm not having some scrounging poltergeist use my electricity to get his jollies. Bill called the electric company and an engineer checked the meter and searched for any tampering from somebody stealing their electricity, but he couldn't find anything. When asked what else it could be, the engineer simply said, it's either you're using too much electricity or something weird is going on. Try searching something weird is going on your electric company troubleshooting webpage. You won't find much.
We had many checks done by Swalek and by independent electrical engineers many times, and indeed the place was rewired in November 1990. We clearly have a problem here that nobody has found.
The electric company, Swalek, made a statement on the bizarre issue. They said, numerous tests were carried out at Heol Fanog. We are quite satisfied there is no leakage of any sort. We have never experienced anything like this before. I feel like the CEO of the company was probably dancing on the table with a glass of champagne in his hand when he sent that statement. Seems like ghosts are good for business. By December 1989, the level of activity began to negatively affect the mental health of the Rich family. Looking for some alone time to clear his head, Bill took baby Ben on a walk around the land. During the walk, he came across Mr. Thomas again. After exchanging pleasantries, the farmer asked Bill about the house and how they were settling in. Although Bill initially lied and said everything was good, he then asked Mr. Thomas if anyone else had experienced anything strange at Heol Fanog. Taking a deep breath, the farmer told him that misfortune had come to those living there and that another farmer had gone to the ruins of the old manor house to use the bricks for a wall. Upon searching, he discovered a pile of broken gravestones scattered among the debris. Mr. Thomas then told him that there was a private burial plot within the manor grounds and that somebody had broken up the gravestones to build something, along with the bricks from the manor. Bill raised his eyebrow and asked, "What did he build?" To which the farmer reacted with a half smirk and said, "Your house." Yes, the Heol Fanog farmhouse was built entirely from recycled bricks, with the large smooth gravestones, perfect for flooring. As all traces of those deceased people were scoured from the stone, there was no telling how many graves were desecrated or how many of those spirits had been disturbed from their eternal slumber. A few days later, after the meeting with Mr. Thomas, Liz and Bill were in the kitchen. The two began to discuss the activity and the prospect that the house could be haunted. They tried to be rational, but as they did, they heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, which suddenly stopped at the bottom step, almost as if the ghost knew they were talking about it. It wasn't just the boots they heard during their time at the house, as the sound of shuffling slippers could also be heard coming down the stairs. As is common in the cases of hauntings, the temperature would often plummet or rise, even with the windows open during the winter. The family felt like they were being watched all the time, like the house was full of people they couldn't see, making them feel unwelcome. To make things worse, all the work commissioned for Bill was suddenly cancelled by several clients. Bill had no idea why they did this and even considered that the dark energies at play had somehow manipulated Bill's clients. That's what I always tell myself every time people cancel writing orders with me. Damn ghosts. With a huge electricity bill and no money coming in, finances became bad. Bill turned to the bottle as a coping mechanism and began drinking more than usual. One day, Liz was out in the barn tending to the pig Bill had brought to keep on the land. Suddenly, the usually calm creature became crazed. It began squealing like a teenage girl at a Harry Styles concert and tried biting Liz. It even chased Liz to the house, with Bill trying his hardest to get the wild-eyed animal to back off. Luckily, Mr. Thomas was passing through and helped lock the feral porker in the barn. The creature then began ramming at the doors, trying to break out. With no other option, the couple reluctantly allowed Mr. Thomas to put the poor animal out of its misery. But sadly, it wasn't the only creature to be affected by the unknown forces at play. Within just a few weeks, their 2 cats had died, a guinea pig died, their dog died, and 6 goats that grazed on the surrounding land also died. What is disturbing is that all creatures also went mad before passing away. Now, if this was some form of rabies, it would have been very unlikely to pass to different species of animal that quickly and would have needed direct contact with each other, which wasn't the case. The rich family could see that this wasn't normal and began to blame the spirits of the house for the deaths of their beloved creatures. Now, the area does have a strong connection with witchcraft and folk tales about blights and livestock deformities caused by curses. It's also worth mentioning that over 40 planes have crashed over the Brecon Beacons mountains over the years, as well as soldiers dying during routine training exercises, adding more fuel to this theory. Could the land surrounding Heol Fanog be cursed? To add to their money worries, the downstairs toilet at Heol Fanog began to push up from the floor, pushing the floor tiles with it. Worried that there was some form of build-up, no doubt praying it wasn't a big beefy bog blocker, Bill called a plumber. When the man took a look, however, the floor and toilet were completely fine. Gobsmacked, the plumber left and the couple talked themselves into believing they must have imagined it. But half an hour later, the toilet had been pushed back up again. The plumber was called back out, and yup, you guessed it, the toilet was fine again. The couple were embarrassed and told the plumber that they weren't lying. Surprisingly, the worker wasn't annoyed and told the couple he believed them, as he had been called out to the house before and experienced something truly terrifying. The plumber explained that 20 years ago, the previous owner, Mrs. Holborn, had hired him to install central heating. The plumber had an apprentice helping him who refused to work alone in the house. The plumber asked him why, but the boy told him that he always felt like somebody was watching him, a feeling the plumber shared. After the job was finished, he returned home, but to his amazement, the owner called him, yelling that all the radiators had fallen off the walls. Jumping in his van, the worker raced back to the farmhouse and, to his astonishment, found all the radiators lying face down on the floor. The plumber reattached them all and left, but the next day she called back to tell him that they had all been removed again. Every night the radiators were pulled off the walls, and every day the plumber returned until he eventually refused. With the validation from the plumber that this wasn't in their minds, Liz asked a Catholic priest to exorcise the house. The man appeared in his purple robes and began praying and splashing holy water around. Afterwards, he told the family that the exorcism was done and he swiftly left. For a few hours, the feeling in the house was much calmer, but suddenly the presence returned, more angry and powerful than ever. One day, Liz went for a walk with baby Ben, but on returning to the house, she realised that Bill had gone to the pub and she didn't feel comfortable being on her own in Heol Fanog. Deciding to wait, she just happened to glance up at the house. To her horror, she saw an old woman looking down at her from Ben's bedroom window. The icy grasp of fear ran down her spine. Plucking up her courage, she stormed up to the room but found it was completely empty. When later asked if she could have been a living person, Liz said there was no way any of the elderly people from Brecon could have made the walk up to the house. When Bill later asked her what the woman looked like, Liz described her as a normal-looking Welsh woman with grey hair and a modern-looking cardigan. This was the first time a spirit had manifested itself. But it wouldn't be the last. Liz needed to know who this woman was and met with a local historian to research the past occupants of Heol Fanog. The historian, Bethan, dropped a huge bombshell and revealed that there had been an exorcism back in the 60s when the Holborn family was still living there. According to the historian, Marianne Holborn was terrified about the activity and approached the local vicar, who brought his choir along. Do you think the vicar may have double booked and had to bring his choir along to fit in both the singing and the exorcism? In the house, the group said some prayers and exorcised it. While we don't know what happened after that day, what we do know is that the spirits lingered. Lawrence, who was initially happy to arrive at his new home, began to turn angry and frightened over the passing months. All of a sudden, Lawrence began shouting at his parents and even told them that he knew the spirits of the house didn't want them there. Lawrence's anger took a sinister turn when Bill's mom came to stay. Wanting to say hello to her grandchild and maybe slap a heavy lipstick kiss on his cheek, the woman was left distraught after Lawrence gave her a "Hock to" the face. Bill was obviously furious and confronted his son, but as he did, his son screamed at him in a voice that didn't sound like his own, as well as having a sinister facial expression. It terrified the father, and he began to believe that the teenager must have been possessed by a spirit of the house. He even told his mom to F off and smashed up his room. Liz believed that it was nothing more than Lawrence hitting puberty, who was sleep deprived and stressed, and even began wondering if it was Bill who was being affected by a paranormal force. You see, Bill was drinking more than usual. In fact, he knocked back more whiskies than Tommy Shelby on a Saturday night.
I was terrified. You know, logically, this cannot happen. You know it. But it has. Bill was affected. He had a huge personality change. It actually took some possession of him.
It was around this time that the family claimed that the piano would start playing by itself. Liz also saw shimmering laser-like lights shooting across the room. In the spring of 1990, Liz went upstairs to check on Ben. She mounted the stairs, but as she pushed the door open, she saw the old woman from the window sitting in the armchair right in front of her. She was just staring at Ben in his cot, with a sad look on her face. As Liz ran over to scoop up her child, however, the woman vanished. Interestingly, Liz said that although she was terrified, she didn't feel any anger coming from the spirit. This meant there was something else lingering within Heol Fanog, trying to drive them out. Bethan, the historian, came round soon after with a pile of information on the past occupants. Getting out a photograph from the 60s, she pointed out the Holborn family. Liz grabbed the photograph with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. "Who is this woman?" asked Liz. "That's Marion Holborn," Bethan replied. Liz began to tremble and told Bethan that Marion was the old woman she had seen. What makes this even more fascinating is that the armchair Liz saw the ghost sitting in originally belonged to Mrs. Holborn. This confirmed that there was something else haunting the house, as Marion had experienced the haunting herself when she was alive. Now she'd become an additional spirit. This now explained the two sets of footsteps, the slippers belonging to Marion, but the man in the boots yet to be identified. In late 1990, Bill and Liz welcomed their second child together, Rebecca. It was around this time that Bill saw a figure in the kitchen who he described as a breathtakingly beautiful young woman who turned towards him and vanished. It's a good job Liz wasn't the jealous type. The couple were at their wits' end and wanted to find a way to keep their family safe, so they called in a man named Larry Harry. What are the odds that his middle name is Barry? Larry, who was a trans medium, said that he could help identify and release the spirits. Desperate, they agreed, and Mr. Harry and his team of Dutch mediums arrived at Heol Fanog. Without hesitation, the mediums got to work and began contacting the spirits. Mr. Harry said that there were 4 spirits in total. He said there was an old woman, who they already knew about, a mischievous young man, and an angry young man. Like cinema staff watching me wait in the auditorium in case there's an after-credits scene, the medium told the 3 spirits they could leave, and with that, the house appeared instantly calmer. Liz asked about the 4th spirit, to which Mr. Harry gave a concerning look. He said that he felt like the 4th entity was far older than the other spirits and was incredibly powerful. The medium said that the spirit had latched onto Lawrence and was trying to possess him. Now, those of you who have watched my videos will know this is quite a common thing with teenagers, especially if they are going through stress and angst, making them more susceptible to these kind of negative attachments. Bill asked what could they do, to which Mr. Harry dryly replied, "The boy must leave the house." Liz was mortified, but Bill said he had to think of the safety of everyone, including Lawrence. Following the advice, Bill sent his son away to a boarding house in Brecon, which hurt the teenager deeply. Lawrence thought that Bill was using this as an excuse to get rid of him, so he could enjoy life with his new family. Liz was upset, but knew he was Bill's son, and didn't have a say in the matter. It is interesting how much influence this psychic had. I mean, he forced someone to move their son out of his house. It does go to show how desperate the situation was. Of course, Lawrence was also acting up at the time, so you never know if the haunting was a good excuse to avoid his mood swings. The group of mediums claimed to have created a psychic barrier to ward off the spirits, but Mr. Harry shared a revelation that he now believed that it wasn't the boy who the spirits are after. Poor Lawrence had been sent to a boarding house for no reason. I know which dad just got a pair of socks that Christmas. The mediums then shared that they had seen the spirits of 7 witches in the barn who were linked to the 4th dark entity. The mediums believed that the witches had used a ritual to summon the entity many centuries ago, and that this dark spirit was now attached to Bill for something bad he did in his past. Mr. Harry then told Bill that the dark entity had been dealt with and would not bother the family ever again. Regardless of what happened, the exorcism appeared to work and the activity in the house calmed down. The electricity usage went back to normal and Bill began to get more work, which meant the financial strain on the family was loosening. Life was getting better, but the spirits of Heol Fanog weren't having any of it. One day, Mr. Thomas came to the house to ask Bill to paint a portrait of his horse, Echo. Bill explained that he needed cheering up as there was a blight on the livestock, which meant farms in the area, including his own, were suffering with deformed, blind or deaf newborn animals. This of course ties back in with the witchcraft stories. Bill took a photo and got to work, but began struggling to paint the back right hind leg of the horse, with it always appearing bent. Even in the finished painting, the legs look slightly broken, but in his defence, drawing is hard. Once the painting was finished, Bill was relieved that Mr. Thomas liked the piece, but a few days later, Bill received a call from the farmer he really didn't expect. Mr. Thomas told him that Echo the horse had died after suffering an injury to its back right leg, the leg Bill struggled to paint. Mr. Thomas then began blaming Bill for the horse's death, as the horse had injured its leg and succumbed to the pain and the elements in the exact place Bill chose as a backdrop for Echo's portrait. Mr. Thomas believed that the painting was cursed and decided to burn it. So it seemed that the dark entity may have been moved from Heol Fanog, but it wasn't gone from the surrounding land. While things in the house were calm for some time, one stormy night, things changed. While Liz was getting ready for bed, Bill burst into the room and showed his wife his hands. All of his fingertips appeared like they had been sliced with a razor blade. Liz asked what he had done, to which Bill replied that he woke up like it. These wounds kept appearing and his fingers began to swell up. It got so bad that Bill was no longer able to paint due to the pain. Bill believed that the entity had returned and was trying to stop him from painting. Without an income, they would have to leave the house. The outcome the spirit wanted.
There was a very great fear, something that one couldn't find. It wasn't tangible. You couldn't chase it down, you couldn't pin it down. But it was there, drumming up the fear. Yeah, terrifying.
Bethan the historian came back to the house a few weeks later to share her findings. Bethan had managed to research the house right back to the 1800s. She noticed there was a pattern in the land registry where people living at Heol Fanog estate, including the original manor house, would only stay for a short period of time after something went wrong, whether it be disputes, fights, financial problems, blight, or strange deaths. The realisation that the haunting had terrorised the area and the owners of Heol Fanog for over 100 years hit them like a brick. In January 1991, Liz and Bill turned to Christianity and began praying with a local vicar. One day, Liz's mother found an Egyptian pendant in the house. When she handed it to Bill, however, he got an electric shock and dropped it. Bill instantly smashed it up, believing it had something to do with the haunting. Now, what would an Egyptian pendant have to do with the haunting of Heol Fanog, you may ask? Well, Liz had a theory that it was the Egyptian god Horus who was also terrorising them. This case has more mythical creatures than a J.K. Rowling book. Years before moving to the farmhouse, Liz and Bill went on holiday to Egypt and visited the pyramids of Cheops. The couple admired the stunning hieroglyphics and the ancient structures that had sat undisturbed for thousands of years before being unearthed. As they ventured into the burial chamber, Liz said that she saw tiny lights shimmering on the walls that she described as like lasers. The same lights she later saw at Heol Fanog. Bill began having horrific nightmares after the visit, where a beaked figure that looked like the Egyptian god Horus would terrorise him. Now, it is believed that this god would guard the tombs of the dead. Liz theorised that maybe they had angered this ancient force by venturing into this sacred burial site. In fact, between June and July of that year, Bill's nightmares about Egypt returned, which culminated in him seeing Horus appear in the kitchen. I guess even deities need a tuna sweet corn sandwich from time to time. This Egyptian connection was just one of many curveballs that would appear in this case before the end. Liz continued to try and find out what was happening and how they could stop it. One day, Liz was struck with an overwhelming smothering feeling, like an invisible fog. While the feeling in the house had been oppressive up until that moment, this time, it felt different. Liz ran to Ben's room and scooped the boy up, but as they got down the stairs, Liz saw the dark entity for the first time walk through the wall from the outside. She described it as a really tall shadow-like figure, void of a face. Ben began to cry and buried his face in his mum's shoulder. Liz tried to calm Ben down, telling him that it wasn't real, but the little boy leaned back and whispered in her ear, "He's behind you, Mummy." She could have passed out through fear, but managed to turn around. But no one was there. This was the last straw for the family, and they quickly rushed to the car and drove away, escaping the evil of Heol Fanog. Or so they thought. At Liz's mom's house, Liz and Bill thought that they were safe, but on the night of arriving, strange voices could be heard in the baby monitor. Bill went to check if the children were messing around, but found they were fast asleep. When he got back to his bedroom, Liz said that she heard him walk in the room, but the voices continued. Terrified that the entity had followed them, Bill threw himself into his work and returned to the old farmhouse to paint. Unfortunately, the stress was too much, and Bill began drinking more. Liz believed that the entity was taking him over, which could be seen in his artwork, which became increasingly sinister. One such piece he made was of a life-sized male figure with bloody bandages covering the eyes. Actual gauze, soaked with Bill's own blood. Seeking answers, Liz went to visit Reverend David Holmwood at a church in the nearby town of Amyityville, who had worked on possession cases in Brazil. As the two were talking, he suddenly said that he could sense evil standing over her shoulder and that the entity was the devil himself. Bill picked up David and his associate, who was a reformed Satanist, Anita, and drove them to Heol Fanog. A reverend and a former Satanist team up. If you can't beat them, join them, I guess. As the group were driving, an owl suddenly crashed headfirst into the windscreen of the car. David said that it was a test for weakness by the devil to try and scare them away. When they got to Heol Fanog, they found another dead bird on the floor. Seeing this, David began to exorcise the house straight away. He started by breaking bread and drinking wine with the occupants. Bread and booze. Sounds like my kind of party. Minus the demonic entity terrorising the house, of course. The Reverend then read a portion of Psalm 23 and watched carefully for any changes in the atmosphere. While nothing happened, David reminded everyone that the trouble was far from over. David told Bill that the demonic forces had been attached to him and asked him where in the house was his favourite place. Bill took David to the art studio, where David took a look at Bill's sinister artwork. He told him that the force had been using him as a conduit to create the images he wanted that could be used as some kind of portal. Bill was hesitant to believe him, but agreed that his style of art had changed drastically since moving to the farm. David explained that the evil force had forced him to paint lots of eyes in his work, which was its way of taking hold of the father. Bill and David spent quite a while talking about things until Anita disturbed them by frantically calling for help. On arriving in the room, they could see Liz sitting in a chair, with a facial expression which wasn't her own. In fact, it was distorted. David asked Liz if she believed in Jesus Christ, to which Liz replied,
"Nothing to do with me,"
in a deep, guttural voice. Although the possession only lasted a few minutes, Liz said that the entity felt disgusting, like pure evil. Shortly after, Bethan the historian turned back up with more information. In fact, she had hit the money load. She discovered that on the 17th of November 1848, at the nearby Cwm Goody farm, Thomas Edwards, a farm labourer, was beaten to death with an axe by his own friend James Griffiths. While the body was found on Cwm Goody, there were numerous rumours that the murder had actually taken place at, you guessed it, Heol Fanog. In court, it is said that James wanted to rob Thomas for the few pennies he had on him, although many agreed that the amount wouldn't be worth murdering someone over. It is believed that James hid in the barn with the axe and waited for Thomas to come outside. Once his back was turned, he crept up behind him and swung the axe down, crushing his skull. James then hid the body in a dung heap until a constable discovered him. Without regaining consciousness, Thomas took his last breath at 6 p.m. that evening. In court, the killer didn't speak a word in his defence, which led to a theory that James was covering for someone else who had links to Heol Fanog. Now, on the face of it, it seems people interested in this case may be grasping at straws, but as you're about to find out, that connection would become more convincing. Years later, Lawrence returned to the house and had got himself a job and was doing well. It seemed that escaping Heol Fanog helped him, a sentiment he shared with his dad, but you could also see that Bill was struggling and appeared weak. At this point, Bill and Liz had gotten a Doberman called Bo, hoping that the canine would make them feel better, but just like the animals before him, the dog became incredibly anxious and its health began to decline. The ghost of Marianne Holborn and the shadow figure had been sighted several times over the years, and the family actually got used to seeing them. Reverend David Holmwood began appearing at the house regularly to perform exorcisms, trying to chip away at the evil that had embedded itself within its walls. Eventually, David requested that several of Bill's paintings be burnt on a large fire to help weaken the demonic connection with Bill. This actually pained the artist, who tried to argue in order to save certain pieces, but David was adamant. While this was going on, the Reverend asked Bill why he thought the entity at Heol Fanog had targeted him, to which the somber man explained that Larry Harry had told him it was related to something bad he did. The Reverend asked him if he thought it was true, to which Bill nodded but failed to share the act. But as is the way of the world, the truth always comes out. After 2 years of David's constant presence at the house, who would regularly come to bless it, nothing was getting better. In fact, the phenomenon was at its most intense. Liz could see Bill's mental health was at rock bottom and told him that she was sick and tired of David talking about the devil and demons, with nothing getting better. Soon after, Bill began talking about hurting himself and discussing how easy it would be to end things. Liz was obviously terrified and concerned, especially with their young children around. It was a truly hopeless situation. On one occasion, Bill held a knife and thought about using it before putting it away. Suddenly, the knife appeared in front of him again. Bill once again put the knife away and broke down sobbing. This is when Liz came to a shattering realisation. It was Bill who had experienced everything first. The footsteps on the landing, the horrible smell, the whirring sound of the meter, and the suspicion that Lawrence was possessed. Liz began questioning herself and wondering if the high levels of stress and mental health mixed with Bill's claims of the paranormal had somehow influenced Liz to hallucinate the same things. She wondered if she had been enabling a mental illness that Bill could have been suffering from. A folie à deux. Liz eventually got too worried about Beau and his nervousness and took him to the vet. This is where she met the local vet, who was surprised to learn that Liz lived at Heol Fanog. The vet was friends with the previous owner and used to help her feed the animals. She shared with Liz that she was terrified of the house and would often hear running across the landing and down the stairs, the same exact thing the Rich family had experienced. The vet thought that it must have been the water pipes, but after turning the water off so it didn't freeze during a snowstorm, she heard the feet again, stampeding across the landing. On March 30th, 1995, the Rich family would welcome one last visitor who claimed they could rid the house of its evil once and for all. This man was Eddie Burks, who made his name in the 90s with a hit TV show called Ghost Hunters. In fact, it was Burks who was credited to have released the trapped spirit of a headless ghost who had, in life, been executed on the orders of Queen Mary at the site of the Coutts Bank. Now, like the case at Heol Fanog, the bank was having trouble with electrical surges and drains, which was wreaking havoc with the systems. It was an artist friend of Bill's who made the connection and contacted Burks for help. Now, Burks was a little bit eccentric, to say the least, and claimed to have been in direct contact with Anne Boleyn, who he said was still angry at Henry VIII for chopping her head off 500 years previously. Some partners just can't let things go. On arriving at the house, Burks picked up on a pre-Christian presence and that there was a creature who had been conjured by powerful black magic, performed by a Celtic tribe. Burks claimed to have spoken to one of the young male spirits haunting the house, who told him that he had been walking through the trees near the manor house many years ago to meet a girl, but she never showed up. Upset, he began walking back home through Heol Fanog, but saw a group of people holding a girl against her will. He recognised one as the owner of the old manor house. He crouched and watched them, but to his horror, they did something horrific to her. The boy ran to his home in Cumgoody, but couldn't get the image out of his head. The next morning, he told his friend about what he had seen. This friend was James Griffiths, the man who'd become the axe murderer. The spirit told Burks that he got blind drunk that night and told everyone in the pub what he had seen. This was a fatal mistake, as it got back to the group who had killed the woman by Heol Fanog. The group approached James and told him that if he didn't murder his friend, he would kill him and his family. As you probably guessed, the young man who had seen the terrible act at Heol Fanog was Thomas Edwards, the farm labourer. The spirit of Thomas apparently told Burks that James was weeping and apologising after the brutal attack while he was burying his body in the dung heap. Could this have been the link to Heol Fanog and that James had been covering for the owner of the manor? While the revelation that Thomas Edwards was one of the spirits haunting the house, it was about to get worse. Burks revealed that he had been trapped with the last spirit the poor boy probably wanted to be around, James Griffiths. James's spirit told Burks that he didn't speak out at the trial because the group had promised they would save him and get him out of prison, a promise they didn't keep. Even when the hangman secured the noose around his neck, James was looking around for the pardon to arrive, but all he got was a short drop and a sudden stop. Now, this does back up Larry Harry's account of two male spirits being among the ghosts at the house, and of course, the history of the murder was there in black and white. Now, there is a chance that Burks had researched the story himself and had just spun a juicy tale, but what happened next forced the Rich family to believe in his gifts. Burks proceeded to perform the exorcism. In the darkened room, Bill couldn't see anything but could feel his fingertips tingling. He also felt a tightness in his chest and pressure at the base of his skull. After this, a crackle of power shot through the tape recorder placed in the room like a lightning bolt had struck it. The second that happened, Bill felt the room get noticeably brighter as if a light had been switched on. Burks finished the exorcism by saying, "I think I will let the thing rest now." Over the next couple of months, the Rich family saw an influx of new spirits walking through the house and out into the garden. Burks believed that he had opened up the door to the other side to allow the two young men to pass over, which meant other spirits could also use the spirit door to pass over themselves. Now, if this had happened in 2024, you just know somebody would have found a way to open a Starbucks and charge the ghost tickets to travel. While most of these spirits were not intimidating, Liz did recount seeing one man with half his face missing and covered in blood. She wondered if this was the spirit of Thomas Edwards. It would have made sense considering the condition his so-called friend left him in. Now, despite the house having more spiritual visitors than Beetlejuice's Netherworld waiting room, the house seemed calm. The physical activity stopped and the electric meter was once again acting normally and only charging the energy used. For a while, things in the house were perfect and the family were finally recovering. But as we've discovered during the case of Heol Fanog, you can't get rid of evil that easily. One night, the Rich family heard the all too familiar sound of whirring. The meter was spinning like it was on The Price is Right, and then it came, the heavy-booted footsteps down the stairs. At this point, Bill knew he had to face his demons, and not the one terrorising the house, but the dark secret he had kept since he was younger. Calling Liz into the kitchen, Bill slid down a cupboard until he was slumped up against it. He then cupped his head in his hands and revealed to Liz that the reason for everything that had happened was because he had practiced witchcraft several years ago. "You're a wizard, Billy." "I'm a what?" What am I doing? Bill told of how, just after graduating, he met a man called Alex Sanders, who was house-sitting in the basement flat of his residence. Now, Sanders was known as the king of the witches in the 60s, who claimed to have conjured old film stars and dead singers just to hang out. As much as I love him, even I'd get annoyed if I heard Elvis singing Suspicious Minds in the basement all night. Who am I kidding? That would rock. Bill and Sanders got on well, and the king of the witches promised him that he could guarantee fame and fortune through his artwork if he followed the ways of witchcraft. Bill agreed, and one night, Sanders invited Bill downstairs. This time, Sanders wasn't alone. His wife and others were also present.
The craft is a religion, and it's not very different to any other religion. Just like churches, just like cathedrals, just like chapels. Possession, and it does possess the Wicca.
He was ordered to strip off naked for the ritual. While he was not asked to drop his car key in a bowl, they did begin reciting incarnations in a synchronised fashion. Sanders then held a sword to his heart, and Bill felt an overwhelming feeling of power rush through him. The feeling got more intense, and suddenly Bill shouted that he wanted to stop. It was just too much for him. But it was too late. What makes this interesting is that Alex Sanders' wife backed up Bill's story and said that she remembered him so vividly because he was the only person ever to back out at the last minute when the spiritual door had been opened. Maxine Sanders believed that as he was on the cusp of the spirit world, something could have slipped through and connected themselves to him. As the Brecon Beacons area had a strong connection with witchcraft, whatever energies were attached may have been empowered by the spiritual atmosphere that resided at Heol Fanog. After the admittance, things at Heol Fanog did calm down again, which was credited to Eddie Burks' work with the family, but it never went away completely. On the 2nd of January 1994, the couple's third child, Thomas, was born. On the 9th of June 1996, the Rich family were finally able to move away from the farmhouse when Liz's grandfather passed away and left her enough money for a new house in a nearby village. While this felt like an escape for Liz, a new start away from the oppressive spirits of the house, for Bill there was one last battle to be won, which was firmly grounded in the living world. Bill had been completely destroyed by the stresses of the haunting, and let's be honest, his drinking, and deteriorated quickly. In fact, he lost his driving licence through drunk driving. This didn't stop him from getting the bus into Brecon to get a hefty supply of Special Brew, a beer with a high alcohol content favoured by alcoholics. The trauma they had experienced for 7 years at Heol Fanog and Bill's alcoholism led to not only the deterioration of the artist's health, but also Liz and Bill's relationship. They divorced in 2005.
In the end, we did have a divorce. Which was the best avenue. We still spoke. It takes two people to make a relationship. It takes two people to break a relationship. So the blame can never be on just the one totally. I mean, it can't.
Bill moved out, and after a few years, Liz got a call she was dreading, but ultimately expected. Bill's landlady had found him unconscious. He was put on life support, but sadly didn't make it. So what are the more rational reasons for the haunting? Well, it could have been a form of psychological contagion, where the high levels of stress caused hallucinations which then influenced each other to experience the same activity. Bill did seem to experience everything first. With Liz and Lawrence being so close to him and trusting him, this could have been the case. Bill's loss of money seemed like some paranormal force was somehow cursing him. But it's important to remember that there was a pretty serious recession in the UK during the 90s, which could have played a part in the money loss. I think another important point to mention is that Bill spent a lot of time painting. This meant that he was exposed to paint fumes and the chemicals in the paint itself, which could be really poisonous if allowed to build up in the system. If Bill had used his fingers to paint directly, it would mean that these chemicals could have been absorbed through the skin and could have affected his brain. It would also explain Bill's swollen and cracked fingers if he was having a reaction to the chemicals. I think an obvious reason for some of the experiences may have had something to do with Bill's drinking, which could have caused alcohol-induced psychosis. Combine that with the psychological contagion spreading between all the family and heightening their paranoia and fear, it would be a recipe for disaster. And that might be the most frightening part of this whole story, that delusion and paranoia, when you are isolated with the people you love and trust the most in the world, could become symbiotic and influence those around you, whether it is positive or negative, without even knowing. Of course, those points don't explain away all the activity and the hauntings that happened before the Rich family arrived. To be honest, there is no single rational reasoning that can explain away every single claim in this case. Do you guys think that Heol Fanog was haunted? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. One other theory in this case, which I haven't touched on, is that spiritual ley lines ran right through Heol Fanog. Ley lines are believed to be a powerful natural energy that many ancient structures were built upon. Due to this power, spiritual and paranormal forces are believed to be empowered. What is more, the ley lines are said to cross through the stairs area and where the electric meter was in the barn. Were the ley lines responsible for all the activity? Was this why the animals died and the pig went crazy within the barn? It also explains why the electric meter acted the way it did. In 2022, Rebecca Rich, the baby who was born in 1990, was interviewed for a BBC podcast on the case. She said that she would often have a recurring nightmare as a child where she was pushed down the stairs but would wake up just before the last step, cold and terrified. This makes me think back to the footsteps heard coming down the stairs which would stop before the last step. Could this dream have been the intention of the dark entity? In that interview, she also said that she and her brother would often see the old lady, who she dubbed the Grey Lady, sitting in the same armchair her mother had seen her in. Rebecca said that she wouldn't say anything, but would just stare at them. We have an Egyptian god, the ghost of a former occupant who herself was haunted, the grisly murderer of Thomas Edwards, witches, and even the devil. Regardless of the level of paranormal activity reported at Heol Fanog since the 60s, I think its isolating backdrop of the lonely Brecon Beacons mountains and the strong connection to folklore and witchcraft in Wales only added to the paranoia, fear and feeling of helplessness in this story.
I saw these things, they were there, and I saw them at the times when I would be least likely to use my imagination.
I suppose the most obvious question which most people want answered is, why didn't you just move out when these things started to happen? What kept you here?
Money. Lack of it. When we moved in, we had plenty of money, we were fine. We then got into such a financial muddle that we couldn't move. We couldn't buy anywhere. The house prices for rental around here went right up. We were stuck. I mean, the one thing I would say to people who are going through this sort of thing, it's very hard because there's no sympathy given to you. You're either classed as maybe mad, on drugs, alcoholic, or just imagining it anyway. It's very hard to find someone that you can go to who can really understand what you're on about.
I really hope you enjoyed this longer style video. There was just way too much information to cover in a short one. If you did enjoy it, please support me by subscribing, giving the video a like and leaving a comment. It really helps the algorithm and persuades YouTube to recommend it to more people. And if it does well, I'll do more longer videos just like this one. And until next time, sleep well, friends.